things, and we are just pairing up the first two, second twos, and so on. And the idea, I mean, the problem is to only count the number of partnerships. So to count the number of two-person partnerships. Okay, so this is the idea or the problem that we're considering. And the way we are solving it is by considering 2n people and looking at the 2n factorial possibilities and pairing up 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, and so on. And here, to count the number of partnerships, the permutations between in a group, as in, so considering the group 1, 2, 3, 4. So the permutation of 2, 1 and 4, 3 are not relevant here. So for every such pair, we have two permutations happening. Okay, and so this is basically overcounting here. So what we have to do is divide by 2 for each pair. So there are n pairs. So you divide by 2 into 2 into n times, which is 2 to the n. Okay. So now the number of partnerships would be this. But can someone say why this is not correct? I mean, something is left. So there is another permutation that we have here, which we don't have to consider because we are only counting just the partnerships and we don't consider the order in which they appear in the string. So can someone tell me what is missing here? Something has to be filled here. I mean, since we are trying to prove the LHS equal to RHS, it's just n factorial. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So it's just n factorial. And why does this n factorial come? So after you arrange these pairs, you have this format. And now these are n pairs. And in the 2n factorial permutations that we are counting, the permutations of these n pairs are also counted. Since we only need to count the number of partnerships, we don't need to consider the permutations of these n pairs. And so we have to divide by n factorial. So is the idea for the proof of LHS clear? So that's how you get the LHS. Okay. So now we just have to see how it's equivalent to RHS, and that's much more easy. So what you have to do is you pick the first person. He can form partnerships with 2n minus 1 people. Okay. And now two people, 1 and 2, or like 1 and whichever person 1 formed a partnership with is taken out of the system. And you have how many people left? You have 2n minus 2 people left. And you pick the first person out of it. And the first person has 2n minus 3 choices to make. And so on. So this would just become the RHS. So that's the idea for RHS. Is the idea clear? So you pick the first person. Two n minus 1 choices. You pick the third person because the second person is paired with the first person. Then he has 2n minus 3 choices because 2 people are already taken out of the system and there were initially 2n people. And this continues till the last number. And the last number is 1 because it's a 2n is an even number, so you can always form pairs. Is the idea clear?
Is it clear, children?
Okay, fine. So that's all here. So we are done with counting here. I mean, basics of counting here. So let's go back to looking at the non-naive definition of probability. Okay. So how do you define a probability sample? So a probability sample consists of two things: the sample space and the probability function. Okay, so this is a function. I mean, I hope everyone remembers what a function is. So this P is a function here which takes A, which is an event, which is a subset of the sample space as input. And this function returns a value between 0 and 1. 0 and 1 included in this range. So P is just a function which takes values, which takes events as inputs. Events are just subsets of the sample space, and then returns a number between 0 and 1. So that will form the probability sample for us. But this P is a special function, and it can't be any such function which satisfies this criteria. So the additional constraints that have to be satisfied by P are that P of the empty set is 0. P of omega is 1. And in addition to that, it has to satisfy this property, which says you take A1 through AN as events which are disjoint, which means they have no intersections between each other. And this should hold true for P if A1, A2 up to AN are disjoint. Okay, so what do I mean by disjoint here? So look at this box as omega, which is the set of all possible outcomes that we can have here, and A1 is some set here, A2 is some set here, A3 is some set here, and so on. So we have infinite number of sets here, and for all these infinite sets, if you union them up, since they are disjoint, their probabilities should add up. So their probabilities of should just be the sum. That's what we are trying to say here. And if they are intersections, this formula would not hold true. But for P to be a valid probability function, these two properties have to be satisfied. So the next question would be, what do you mean by an infinite union? So in the first lecture, we have seen what is a union. So union is basically, so say you have two events, A1 and A2. So union just means you take all the outcomes here and consider all the outcomes in A2 and combine them together. So A1 union A2 is all the outcomes possible from A1 or A2. Okay, but what do you mean by an infinite union? It's a slightly tricky notion, but the way you can think about is as follows. So when I write this is what I mean. So consider some arbitrary element x. So x should be part of this union if x is an element of n equal to 1 to infinity, if x is an element of a1 or x is an element of a2 or any of these sets, a whatever infinity. I mean, this is not a right way to say it, but yeah, there are infinite number of sets, but x is an element of this union if x is an element of one of these subsets. That's the way you should think about it. And yeah, we'll see more applications of this later on. So for the simple case, what we'll be looking at is this formula here has to be satisfied for finite number of cases. Since it's satisfied for infinite number of sets, A1 through AN, where n is finite, should also be valid. So taking union of finite number of disjoint events should add up. So the probabilities of these events should add up if they're disjoint. So these are two crucial properties that have to be satisfied for P to be a valid probability function. And this is a minimal set of axioms that we sort of assume to hold for this function, so that like we can prove all the different properties that you have seen and coming up in probability. So this is very powerful if you see it. It's just a collection of two axioms, and with this you can prove every single axiom, I mean every single identity that you've seen in probability. So to come up with this was a very complicated decision in the history of probability. There were a lot of debates and discussions. And in the beginning, probability was just based on intuition. And we have seen counterexamples where it's just not intuition and there are things which happen counterintuitively. But this structure gives a valid mathematical model to probability. And everything that you want to do with the function p can be done with just these two axioms. Okay, so, and also just a simple point to note, you say that an event a1 has occurred. So a1 is an event, and a1 has occurred if some element in a is the outcome. Do keep this in mind, because it's easy to confuse between outcomes and events. And this is sort of an important point, which is simple, but yeah, it can lead to confusion. So, okay. And these two axioms are fairly justified. These are just not two random ideas, because if you look at the sample space omega and an event a, let's say E is a point inside it. So if E is an element of phi, that's E is an outcome. So when I say it's an outcome, A has happened. And if the event A is phi, which is the empty set, then there is no such element. So since there's no such element, E, when you consider A as phi, the probability is 0 because there is no element to consider in the first place. Okay. But whereas if A itself is omega, then whatever outcome you may face would be inside A, because A is now omega. And in that case, the probability or chance of this outcome E happening is 1, which is the maximum value that the function P can take. So that's why these axioms are true. And these are called axioms because they have no proof for it, why they come into place. But everything else that follows would rely on these two axioms. Okay. Is the idea of the function P and probability sample clear? Okay, cool. All right. So before returning to, I mean, you starting to use non-naive definition of probability, let's see a very important problem that many of you may have come across. So this problem is known as the birthday problem. Okay. So what is this problem? You have k people to start with, and the problem is to estimate the probability that any two people out of these k people have the same birthday. Okay. Okay, this is the problem. So to make this more concrete, we can start by sort of excluding leap years to make the problem slightly more simple. So this would mean that I'm excluding February 29th, but please don't be offended if some of you have February 29th as their birthday. I'm just excluding for the ease of calculation. So let's exclude leap years for now and assume we have 365 days, which implies, yeah, it's not an assumption. So 365 days in a year. All right. And we consider each of these 365 days equally likely, which means that any of these days can happen with equal probability. Okay. And we also make this assumption that the births are independent. We'll come to what we mean by independence in a concrete manner in the next lecture. But here you can think of it as follows. So two births are said to be independent if one birth, a person's birth, does not affect the birth of another person. So for example, say there are twins in a class. So that should be that we don't consider that for now, because the birth of one person actually implies the birth of another person because they are twins. So these are the assumptions we make to define this birthday problem, to state this birthday problem. Okay, so are these assumptions clear for everyone? Is the problem clear? So we have k people, and we just need to estimate the probability that any two people have the same birthday. Okay. Okay. So how do we answer this question? So intuitively, if k is a very large number, or say if k is just greater than 365, what is the probability? Can someone tell me what is the probability? I mean, this is just a simple counting problem. So we have more than 365 people in a class. And what is the probability that two people will have the same birthday? Yes, exactly. So it's 1. Why is it 1? Because I mean, there are 365 people. And in the worst case, each of these people might have different birthdays. So let's consider these as boxes: 1, 2, 3, 365. Okay. And now here k is greater than 365. And in the worst case, everyone has a different birthday of the year. I mean, in the year. And the next person comes. So 366th person comes, and he will fall into one of these boxes, because that's the only choice he has. There are only 365 boxes because there are only 365 possible birthdays in a year. And this is a powerful technique for proving, impossibilities in counting problems. So this is known as the pigeonhole principle. Okay. And because of pigeonhole principle, when k is greater than 365, this probability is 1. Okay, this was simple. Now, what happens if k is less than or equal to 365? So this is basically asking how many people are required to have a 50% chance. We are not asking for 100% chance like before. So the number of people now are less than 365. So it's some number less than 365. And now the question is, how many people do we need so that there's a 50% chance that two people have the same birthday? Okay. So if people have seen this before, please don't answer this question. So what do you think this answer would be around? The question is, how many people do we need so that there's a 50% chance that you will have the same birthdays? Two people will have the same birthdays. I mean, looking at the scale of the problem, like students, please guess their values in the chat box. I mean, 365 is a fairly large number. So, I mean, how many people do you think are needed to actually like have two birthdays like coinciding. So this is a very large class. So there are 365 people at max. But what is the minimum number that you think? So that like you have a 50% chance.
Children, it's okay if your answer is wrong. You can just make guesses.
Yeah, I
Whatever
mean,
you feel is the right answer.
yeah, please don't guess more than 365. Anything else is fine. Okay, that's a good guess. Close. I mean, so there are how many participants right now? There are around 89 participants. So I would at least like to see like 10 of them.
Yes. Pawan, Sahana, Sandesh, Sangmesh, Anchal, Nityashri, from MTech, Bhavyashri, Anusha. Please go ahead and make your guesses. It's okay if the answer is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfectly fine. This is not an intuitive problem by any chance. Oh, very close. Okay, these are pretty good guesses. I mean, I would have guessed something like 100, but yeah, I mean, these are pretty much more accurate than my guesses. Yeah, very close. 24. Okay, surprisingly, the answer is just 23. And, yeah, all you guys were pretty close. And do you see the reason why this is such a small number? Can someone give me a vague idea? I mean, one line idea of why this is such a small number for getting a 50% chance. So the basic counterintuitiveness comes up for this fact. So you have 365 possible boxes to fill. So 1, 2, up to 365 boxes. And I'm asking, like, even if you distribute these evenly, you're saying that with just 23 people instead of with just 23 people, which would mean that like 1, 2 might be filled. 1, 2 up to 23 are filled. And then 360 minus 23 are left, which is like a huge number. It's like 337 or something. So, I mean, so around 330-ish boxes are empty. And still this number is 23 to have like a 50% chance. I hope this counterintuitiveness is clear for you. Is it clear? I mean, you have 365 boxes to fill and you only have 23 of them. And I'm saying that like one of them needs to have, I mean, with a 50% chance that it should have like two elements in it. Okay. Fine. So this is sort of very counterintuitive because 23 is very small when compared to 365. But I mean, this can be proved using probability again. So how do you show this? So when you see this problem is difficult to actually like absolutely estimate using some idea. So the question is, what is the probability of a match? Which means that like you need two people to have the same birthday. Okay. And this is a difficult problem. You don't know how to think about it. So the easy way to think about this problem is this. So the probability of no match. So this means that no two people out of these k people have the same birthdays. This is an easy problem because we have seen a similar problem like this, which was the last counting problem we saw, which was this problem. So this is in similar to the RHS of this problem. Okay. So how do we do this? So the probability of no match is just so assuming we have k people to start with. Okay. So what do I mean by this? The first person has 365 days to fill in. He can pick any of these 365 days as his birthday. The second person only has 364 days because he can't coincide with what the first person chose. And since there are k people, this would be 365 minus k plus 1 people. Okay. So the last person, the kth person, has 365 minus k plus 1 choices to make from. And we have assumed that each of these days are equally likely. And because of that, we can apply the naive definition of probability. So can someone tell me what would be the denominator? So the denominator is just the number of total possible outcomes. So I'll give you a hint. What is the denominator? I mean, it's not 365, it's something else. Can you tell me what is the denominator? So the denominator has no constraints, but the numerator had the constraint that no two people can have the same birthday. And that's why it became 365 into 364. So that's the hint. So what would be the denominator for k people? Can someone tell? Yeah, I mean, sort of, but like the order is not important here. It's not k factorial. I mean, each person has 365 possibilities. So how many people are there? K people are there. Okay. Close. I mean, it's not minus, it's 365 and k, but something else too. Okay, people are close. There should be an operator between 365 and k. So what is the, okay. I think we need to make things more clear here. So each person has 365 possibilities. So the first, I mean, think about the multiplication rule that we saw in the last class. Each person, and there are like k people. The first person can choose any of these 365 days. The second person can also choose any of these 365 days. Third person can also choose these 365 days up to the kth person. Okay. Okay. Like a sample output would be this, right? So he just picks one. The second person picks one again. Third person picks one again, up to like the last person, kth person picking one again out of 365. And it can be 365, 365. Everyone picks 365. Okay. So how many ways can this happen? Yeah, exactly. 365 to the power k. Exactly. So 365 to the power k. That's good. So I hope everyone understands why the denominator is 365 to the power k, because there are no constraints and the numerator is just multiplication rule applied. So the numerator is also the multiplication rule applied. We just need to know the number of possible ways students can have birthdays in any way, no, without constraints. So there are k people, so 365 to the power k, because yeah. Is it clear? Each person is distinct here. So person A is distinct from person B, and that's why we can apply the multiplication rule. Okay, fine. So this is the probability of a no match. And what we need to estimate is 1 minus this. And so if you compute this with applying this formula, if you plug in k equal to 23, you'll get a probability of match as 50%, 50 point something, slightly something like this. Okay. And this is pretty counterintuitive. And so to like make the counterintuitiveness concrete, can someone tell me what would be the probability if there are 50 people in the class to have like the same birthday? Like two people, when you have a class of 50 people, what is the probability that two people will have the same birthday? I mean, don't go back and plug 50 into this formula and check it. Just tell me from your intuition what this value would be. Exactly. So this is a very high value. Even with just 50 people, you are able to like have a coincidence. And the coincidence comes from the fact that, I mean, this is actually 97%. And for k equal to 100, I mean, with just 100 people, uh, you will get a 99.99%. So there are 365 days. And it seems like, even assuming that like every single day is equally possible, which is not actually case, there are seasonal effects for birthdays. Even assuming like all these 365 days are equally likely, we are seeing that with just 100 people, we have like 99.99% chance that they some two have the same birthday. Okay. And this mostly, I mean, to see this intuitively, the idea I can put forward is this. So since we have k people, to have the same birthdays, I mean, we have to pick two people which have the same birthdays. So there are two people. How can you pick two people from k people? There are k choose two ways of doing it. And if you pick 23 choose 2, this actually turns out to be 23 into 22 by 2. If you just substitute a formula from the last class, this is just 23 into 11, and this would be 253. Okay. So there are 253 coincidences possible when you have 23 people. So when you have 23 people, you can pick two people in 253 different ways. And 253, when compared to 365, is a fairly large number. It's close to 365 than 23. And that's intuitively the reason why 23 actually suffices to get you 50% probability. Okay. So what I'm trying to put forward is probability can be very counterintuitive. Cool. And to make things more complicated, I can ask the following question, which is when people have a birthday one day apart, as in say someone has a birthday on April 1st, and what is the probability that someone else has a birthday on, I mean, not the probability, someone else has a birthday on April 2nd. And what is the probability that this can happen? Like two people having consecutive birthdays. And how many people do you need so that you get a 50% chance? And the answer is surprisingly very small. To coincide, the number of people required was 23. And to have one day apart, this number is 14. And to estimate this, the calculation required is slightly more complicated. And we'll see it later in the course. But these are quite interesting to see in the first place. Okay. Now let's go back to the non-naive definition of probability definition back again. So we had two axioms. The first one was that the probability of an empty set is just 0, and the probability of the whole sample space is 1. And for infinite unions, this should just become a sum through infinity. This would become a sum if a1 through an infinity are disjoint. Okay. Okay. Fine. Now let's see a few important properties of this non-naive properties of this non-naive definition of probabilities. Okay, many of you would have already seen this, but let's see how you prove it as well. So the first property that we are going to see is that the probability of A is 1 minus probability of A complement. And I need you to prove this using only the two axioms that we have stated. Okay. The proof is pretty simple, and it's as follows. So we have been using this formula quite a lot, but we haven't proved it yet. And to prove that, we actually needed this non-naive definition, which we only defined it right now. So let's just see the formal proof of it. So by the axiom 1, the probability of omega is 1. And if you take any event A, the event of A union A complement is same as the event A union A complement is same as the sample space, because everything in A versus everything outside of A would just make up the sample space. Okay. Note that A and A complement are disjoint events. They have no intersection. So by axiom 2, this would mean that this is same as probability of A plus probability of A complement. This is axiom 2, and this is axiom 1. So we just used axioms and the idea of disjointness to prove this. The intersection A complement is 5. Oh. So this is the formal proof for why this is true. Now let's see another property. So consider an event A and another event B such that A is a subset of B. Then the probability that A happens is less than or equal to the probability that B happens. Okay. I mean, this is intuitively true because A is a smaller set and B is a bigger set. And when A happens, B definitely, I mean, when B happens, A definitely, I mean, A definitely need not happen, right? Because when B happens, it can be some point here. But when A happens, it definitely means that B happens. So whenever A happens, B definitely happens, and hence probability of A is less than or equal to probability of B. But that's not enough for us. We need a formal proof for this. So what is the proof? Okay, let's think about it. The ideas that we have are just two axioms, and the only axiom that can actually imply an inequality between the probabilities is the second one, because the first one doesn't talk about unions or intersections or anything, and we need to use the fact that A is a subset of B. Sorry. So to start with, let's try splitting the event B and then splitting it up and then using disjointness to prove this property. So if we split B into disjoint events, then the probabilities would add up. And if the probabilities add up, we can show that since the probability function is greater than or equal to 0, the LHS would be greater than or equal to the RHS without the rest. Okay, it might not sound concrete for now. So let's just see it. Okay, can someone tell me how to write probability of B as disjoint events with respect to A? So you need to split B as a union of disjoint events. I have written one disjoint event here. What is the, I mean, one of the disjoint events here? What would be the next event? What would be the second bracket? Can someone tell me what the second parenthesis would be? Oh, B minus A. Okay. So this would be b minus a if this is a and b. And now we have made a intersection b. All right. So one person has answered. So the intersection is a intersection b, which we have already used. So that's the orange color one, or whatever color that is. So the rest that is left is b minus a. And how do you write b minus a? Okay, let's just write it as b minus a for now. So this is true. Fine. And we know that these two are disjoint because of the diagram here. So we can write it as probability of A intersection B plus probability of B minus A. Okay. What do we do now? It's pretty simple. So what is probability of A intersection B? So we need a comparison between probability of A and probability of B. So here we have A intersection B. Can someone tell me what this would be? So note that P is a function exactly. This is exactly A. So this is the probability of A plus something greater than or equal to 0. Why? Because the P function is defined to have its range from 0 to 1. So this probability of B minus A is something greater than or equal to 0. So this means that probability of B is at least probability of A. Is this proof clear to everyone? Cool. Okay. Let's see something slightly more involved. So when you have two events, A and B, which are not disjoint, we need to prove the following. I mean, many of you would have already used this just like that. But how do you prove it? So the proof is similar to the one above. You basically have to split A union B into A, B, and something else. So should I leave it as an exercise? Okay, I'll leave this one as an exercise. Okay, this can be a homework. And this is pretty simple. It just follows from the ideas above. No new ideas required. Just split A union B into disjoint events. Make one event as A and make one as B with something else. And figure out how you get the probability of B minus probability of A intersection B. That's the idea. Okay. Now let's see the fourth property. We have this for more events. And you again would have seen this formula, but just making things concrete. So this is A intersection B minus probability of B intersection C minus probability of A intersection C. And you are overcounting, so you just add intersection B intersection C. I mean, this should be fairly intuitive from using a Venn diagram. So compare the LHS of this statement with the RHS of the statement and use Venn diagrams to prove this. And you can view areas as areas covering these Venn diagrams as probabilities. And the formal technique to prove this would be to use induction. Use induction to prove this. I hope everyone knows what induction is. You just solve it for a base case, then you assume that it holds for some number of events and then generalize. Okay. Okay, sorry. So you don't have to use induction here. You can use induction here. So when you have A1 union AN, what would this be? So this is something you can sort of remember in your heads. This is pretty important. It might come up in many places. So you add up these individual events first, which is just probability of A plus probability of B plus probability of C in the fourth example. When you have n events, you just add up all these n events first. Sorry, the index should be J. So J equal to 1 through n, you sum up these probabilities. Now you are overcounting many things. So the first thing that you are overcounting are pairwise intersections. So if you remove pairwise intersections, and when you remove these pairwise intersections, you will end up removing in tri-intersections. So 3 sets intersecting. So you will have to add these up. AI intersection, AJ intersection, AK, and I less than J less than K. And while doing this, you might remove intersections between 4 sets, and you proceed as follows, alternating between the minus and plus. And finally, you will have this term, depending on what the number of sets are, n plus 1. And the final probability that you are going to add or subtract would be intersection AN. And this is exactly the last term in fourth example, plus probability of A intersection B intersection C. So this would be the generalized formula for the union of n sets. And we will see an easier proof of this without induction later in the course, but the simple way would be to just use induction. And since we have the base case as 3, you can go ahead and show by induction that it would work for some k and prove that it works for k plus 1. Okay, fine. Now let's see another interesting problem to end the class. Okay, so this problem is known as De Mont's problem. This is a very old problem which came up from gambling in around 1713. And this is a very natural problem which can arise in many situations. It's also called the matching problem. You'll see why. And the problem is pretty simple. So you have a card game again, because gambling. And then say you have n cards. So n need not be 52 here. It's some number. You have many cards. So 1, 2, up to n cards here. And you shuffle these cards and put it on a table with the backside up. So you can't see the numbers which are on these cards. So you have 1, 2, 3, up to n cards. And these n cards would have, when you flip it up, you can see the number on it, right? So the question is this: what is the probability that when you flip the nth card, that you will see the label n? So this is the question. Flip the nth card, should be labeled n. So what have you done? So you have n cards, you shuffle all of them, put it on a table with backside up. So you have an ordering right now, 1 through n. So when you pick the first card, and if it turns out that the first card itself is labeled 1. So let's assume the labels are not 1, I mean, kings, clubs and all those. I mean, kings, tens, jacks, queens and all. Let's just, for simplicity, assume that the numbers are labeled from 1 through n again. So we have 1 through n cards and they are labeled from 1 through n. So after shuffling, it might end up that the first card comes in the jth position, some position, because it's shuffled. I'm asking what is the probability that the nth card is labeled n, so the numbers match. And this is why it's called the matching problem. And the question is to calculate the probability of this happening. And n can be very large. So yeah, I mean, we need to solve this problem for some arbitrary n. And I'm asking you, like, what is the probability that some card matches its position? So here nth card does not mean the n here, I'm sorry. So I just mean kth card matches k. And at least one such event should happen. So to define it formally, what I'm saying is the probability that this happens where ak is some event ai, I mean some event a1, a2, a2, a3 up to an. So ak is defined to be the event that jth card, sorry, kth card matches kth position, its position. So when you pick up this kth card, it should turn out that the number written on it is k. So let's call that the event ak. And the event, I mean, the probability that we have to calculate is for the event that at least one such event happens. A1 through an happens. That's the question. And since we just saw the inclusion exclusion principle, okay, I did not say that. So this is called the inclusion exclusion principle because you are repeatedly including and excluding events. Okay. This would be an interesting application of that. And there are many ways to solve this problem. I'm just showing you guys one easy way. I mean, the easiest way that I know of to solve this problem. Okay. So here we would use a lot of symmetry in the problem. And if you look at the formula above, it's just adding up the probabilities of the individual events first. So this is just a sigma probability of AIs. So what you need to start with is the probability that AI happens. What is the probability of AK? Can someone tell me what is this for any card? Okay. Someone has said 1 over n. That's absolutely right. Yeah, it is 1 over n because you can pick the kth card to be in the kth position. And there are other cards on the left and right side of it. How many cards are there? To be precise, there are n minus k cards. Right? No, there are n minus 1 cards because k is just a position. So there are n minus 1 cards and they can be arranged in any ways. And the total number of arrangements possible are n factorial. So it's just n minus 1 factorial by n factorial, which is 1 over n. And the intuitive way to just see the 1 over n directly is to just note that any card can go to any position because these cards are shuffled with equal chance of being in any position. So there are n positions. So each position is equally likely. So 1 over n. Okay. So we know this. So this term would just be sum over 1 over n. And there are how many terms? N terms. So this would be exactly this. The first term. I think my time is over. Just ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Can I continue the class for another 5 minutes?
Yeah, sure, sir. Please continue.
Yeah, is it okay for everyone else?
Yes, it's okay for all of you. Children, is it okay? Yes, of course it will be okay.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
thank you. Okay, so I'll just quickly end this. So there are n such cards, and this summation is from I equals 1 through n. So this was the first term in the inclusion exclusion thingy. So this is not equal to yet. I'm trying to make it equal to. So the first term is 1 over n times n terms, because each of these cards are equally likely and each of the cards are sort of the same. So 1 over n times n. Okay, that should be clear. And now the question is, how do, I mean, there are many terms which have intersections coming up. So if you look at this, the intersections go on increasing. So the first one is 2 intersections in this formula. The second one is 3 intersections, and so on. So it goes on up till n intersections, right? Which is this term. So what we can do as a trick is to estimate the probability that this intersection happens. So k is some number between n and 1. And if we can estimate this, we can estimate it for all n's if we have some symmetry to be applied, which we obviously have here, because any card goes to any random place. That's one symmetry that we can use. And how do we figure this out? Okay, let's just look at the simple case of 2 event intersections, AI intersection AJ, which means that the ith card is in the ith position and the card I is in the ith position and the card J is in the jth position. So you fix 2 positions and you have n minus 2 positions to permute over. And similarly, you have the denominator as this. So just applying it for k, fixing k positions and permuting the other positions, you'll get this formula. All right. Now let's plug it back into the formula, right? So here we got the first term. We need this probability that AI intersect AJ, I less than or equal to J. So can someone tell me the number of terms in this sum? You can't have repetitions. So I is strictly less than or equal to J. So this is the number of pairs that can happen. And that would exactly be n choose 2. Is that clear for everyone? So AI, the number of terms in the summation of AI intersection AJ would be n choose 2. Is that clear for everyone? Okay, cool. So since we just have to pick some set I and some set J, and we can pick 2 sets from out of these n sets in n choose 2 ways. So the number of terms in the sum would be n choose 2. And what is n choose 2 again? N choose 2 is just n factorial. Okay, let me just simplify that. It would be just n into n minus 1 by 2. All right. But that's not useful. Let's just try to simplify the term above as well. So simplifying this term, you get 1 by n into n minus 1, just expanding it. So these two goes, you get a 1 over 2 here. Okay. And 1 over 2 is same as 1 over 2 factorial. So let's just consider it as factorial for now. And what would happen for k terms? I less than j less than whatever k. Sorry. K. So we have one part of this, which is n minus k factorial into n factorial, which is true for every single term in this sum. Now the question is, how many terms are there in the sum? So you just have to pick k sets from n sets. So that would be exactly n choose k. So that is exactly this. So after cancellation, you get 1 over k factorial. Okay. So for 2, it was 2 factorial. So for k is k factorial. And now we are done, because what we wanted to estimate is this. And we know that every single term is just a factorial with the sum alternating, because the sum is alternating. I mean, the symbols, the signs are alternating in this summation. So if you look at this formula, this summation symbols are alternating. It's minus plus minus plus. So we just have to repeat that. So it's 1 minus 1 by 2 factorial plus 1 by 3 factorial, some 1 by k factorial somewhere, and then minus 1 to the whole and plus 1, 1 by n factorial. Okay. Is that clear? So this looks complicated, but due to symmetry, things boil down to very simple terms, and then we simply applied the inclusion exclusion principle here. So it's a very powerful technique, and helped us solve the problem quite easily. Okay, now the interesting fact is, if you guys have seen the Taylor expansion of e to the x, uh, what was that exactly? So have you guys seen the Taylor expansion of e to the x?
I don't think we have this in the syllabus, sir. I don't think children are aware of this.
Oh, okay. So what you can do is like Google Taylor expansions, and like many prominent formulas, for example, log 1 plus x, where x is less than mod x is less than 1, e to the x, and sine x cos x, and so on, have these expansions known as Taylor expansions. So it comes up in calculus. So so for e to the x, the Taylor expansion would be just, if I'm not wrong, so I might be wrong here. I mean, some plus 1 minus 1 might be missing, but this is roughly how e to the x looks like as a Taylor expansion. So x is some term here, and then this is the expansion. So if you put e to the minus 1 here, first term alpha, okay, e to the 1 here. So it's just 1 minus 1 over 2 factorial plus 1 over 3 factorial, and so on. Okay. Okay, I might be missing something here. It should be e to the minus 1. So okay, that's fine. So there's a minus 1 error somewhere happening in this formula. So please verify that. If you look at this formula, so this exactly, if you have up to infinity, so this is up to infinity. So you need to have infinite terms in the summation. And when you have infinite terms in the summation, this would exactly become 1 over e. All right. Okay, now I get it. Fine. So this won't be 1 over e. This is just okay. This would be just 1 over e, or 1 minus 1 over e. Okay, I'm confusing you guys here, but just verify me on this. This would approximately turn out to be 1 over 1 minus 1 over e, if you have infinite number of terms. And what this means is that the probability that you have a card matching when you have infinite number of cards. So you have infinite number of cards, you shuffle them and you put it on the deck. What you expect to see is that when you have a large number of cards, you don't expect it to match with any position, right? Because there are a lot of shufflings possible, and like it's very unlikely that some card is in the same position. So we expect it to drop, this probability to drop to zero, but actually it's dropping to some constant. And that's the point that I'm trying to state here. So it's the probability is not dropping to zero when n increases, the number of card increases, and it's dropping to 1 minus 1 over e. So I will clarify the Taylor expansion of e to the x in the Google Classroom thing. So, I mean, please do check the formula for e to the x and then try to substitute it for e to the minus 1 or e to the 1 and try to figure out how this is 1 minus 1 over e. Okay. So that's all I wanted to say for today. In case any of you have other doubts except this one, we can clarify it now.
Children, do you have any doubts? Okay, no, sir. Okay, okay, great. Thank you. Please mark your attendance by typing birthday problem as the code for today.
Okay, just to make things clear before we end the lecture, can everyone hear me?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, so this is the formula for e to the x, and just substitute the value for e to the minus 1 in this formula, and you will get the above expression with the 1 minus. So you have to do a 1 minus after e to the minus 1 to get the expression. So I'll share the corrected lecture notes in the Google Classroom.
Yes, sir. And we'll leave for now, sir. As soon as this class gets over, I'll quickly give you a call.
Sure, ma'am.
So
Sure,
that
ma'am.
we'll work out on either Google Group or Google Classroom.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thanks
Yes,
a lot.
sir. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.